If Christ is king, how should the Christian consider the kingdoms of this world? What does the Bible teach us about human authority and what it means to love our neighbors and our enemies? Before we render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, let's know what it means to render unto God what is God's. This is the Biblical Anarchy Podcast, the modern prophetic voice against war and empire.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Biblical Anarchy Podcast. This is a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I am your host, Jacob Winograd, and today's episode, I've been really busy the last couple weeks, as I think I alluded to in a previous episode or live stream. I was attending the Rescue the Republic rally in D.C. the past weekend from the time I'm recording this, and that was wild, and I do plan on recording a solo episode with some of my thoughts on that weekend and stuff that came out of that. But I also have a couple live stream interviews coming up, or one that already happened, one with Clint Russell of Liberty Lockdown and one with Angela McArdle, the chair of the Libertarian National Party. And I thought, and since I'm a little busy and haven't had time to sit down and do a regular solo episode, I'm going to instead play you a clip from the recent live stream I did with Clint Russell and talking about a complex that we see both in some Christians and some libertarians, which I labeled the Jonah Complex. And so kind of talking about how we do evangelism, how we do coalitioning, how we live in this world and try to interact with the people in it, and what we should be doing with our own hearts, how we should be setting our own hearts toward other people. Kind of what the part of this conversation is. So as always, if you want to hear the full conversation, a link will be in the show notes or description to take you to that, which I highly recommend. Clint was having some weird issues with the building he was living in having an alarm going off every few minutes. So our conversation was a little bit disjointed. So if you go listen to the full conversation, or I think even the clip I'm playing, you might notice that. But other than that, a little distraction. It was a very good conversation, and I hope to have Clint back on in the future as well. So go ahead and listen to this clip, and I'll talk to you on the other side. Like when you read Rothbard, like I read like Anatomy of the State, and he kind of picks up on the how the state sort of tries to claim a sort of like position of absolute moral authority and sovereignty in society. It just seems to me, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, it seems to me that if you don't have something like Christianity, which puts something in that position of sovereignty, that then you are leaving that sort of like vacuum open for something like the state to come and grab a hold of, and then sort of create their own religion with.
Look at the deification of Fauci. I mean, isn't it obvious that that's what people do? So yeah, I think that that's definitely like human instinct, that we need that. You know, as Jordan Peterson famously says, or I'm sure he stole it from someone, but a God-shaped hole. And it seems like people do replace that with the state if it's not filled with God. And from my vantage point, I've always tried to fill it with, you know, just liberty itself. But I think that most people can't do that. And I think for most people, Christianity is a far superior thing to worship than the state or basically anything else. So that's why I just don't understand the outrage about seeing someone who's a reformed sinner, like overtly so. Russell Brand was a sex addict and a drug addict, and God knows what other, you know, terrible things he's done in his life. And now he's this, you know, repentant evangelist. And it's like, well, maybe his style isn't for you, but is that not what you want to see in the world? Like, is that not what you want to have come about? So I think that to me was the biggest surprise, is like that clip I put out did 14 million views on X. So I got thousands of replies, and I can't tell you how many people were like fraud, you know, grift, a bunch of other negative things that I won't repeat on your show. But and I was just amazed at how negative the reaction was. And And kind of my takeaway, even as someone who's not very religious myself, but it seemed as if people were offended. I mean, some of the religious people were offended, which I found totally bizarre. But the thing that I found more interesting is that a lot of the non-religious were furious. And I think that speaks to something, and I'm not sure what, but that was my takeaway.
Well, so I made a post about my thoughts on this on X a few days ago, and I've thought this for a while, but I didn't have a name to give it until I looked it up, because I was like, there has to probably be a name for this. And when I found it, it like made perfect sense. I think, and this is a problem we see like in our spaces, like in libertarian spaces and in our time in the Libertarian Party, but I also see this with Christians too. And it's kind of like what people call a Jonah Complex, which the way that it's defined by Google at least is a psychological condition that keeps us grounded in our comfort zones, afraid to embrace change or greatness. It can be a fear of also, and I think this can extend to others. It's like if we see others that are overcoming adversity, if we see others that are engaging in sort of things that we're not comfortable doing ourselves, that because we can't do it, we then judge them for doing it. And also it can be, if you know the story of Jonah, God tells Jonah to go to Nineveh to tell them that they need to repent because of all the sins that they engage in. And Jonah doesn't want to go. And it's like partly because he's afraid to, but also partly because he's like, well, they don't deserve it. They're just so bad. They shouldn't have a shot at redemption. And it's almost kind of like this elitist kind of thing. And you know what? Like when you start thinking about it, isn't that sort of the same attitude that so many libertarians and unfortunately also I would say Christians have, which is that they don't, it's ironic when Christians have it because our whole religion's about redemption. But it's like they don't want people to be redeemed. Like they would rather continue to be big fish, ironically, the Jonah story, but they want to be big fish swimming in small ponds. And that's kind of what I feel like is going on in libertarian circles, is that they don't like these coalitions because, and listen, they can like give it other arguments. They can go, well, this person's a Zionist and that person wants universal health care. It's like, okay, do we just want to be, do we want to forever be stuck in this place where we go to libertarian conventions and the same 50 to 100 people show up and we, make the same jokes and we tell the same speeches and we, we're moving ships around on the Titanic every couple of years? Or do we want to actually increase liberty in our society? And do we want to actually make more libertarians? Well, if we actually want to do those things, then we can't be afraid to go to Nineveh and preach the message that needs to be preached. And I don't know about you, but I get so frustrated when I hear people say that the libertarian moment and the Ron Paul moment has come and gone. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we don't have an uphill battle in terms of the actual enemy, but in terms of the people themselves, there are so many people who are still coming to understand more about libertarian ideals, and like they haven't heard these ideas ever. And when I was having conversations with people about this whole thing with FEMA and North Carolina, and they're just like, how could it be this bad? And I'm like, all right, well, here's some quotes from Mises and Rothbard on the problem of economic calculation and social planning. Is that like, even if you put saints in these positions, they would fail to do their job. And we know that they're not saints, that half of the government is probably, Epstein Island level, connected pedophiles and just like the scum of the earth. So when it's like, and people hear that and they're like, wow, I've never thought about that before. But, and so they start, embracing more of a free market mindset. But it's like, a lot of people don't want to do this because of, I think what I've labeled as this Jonah complex, the fear of success. It's a fear of going outside our comfort zones. And it's a fear to let go of our judgment of others because we want to cling on to that moral superiority that like, oh, we're the cool club, right? We got it all right. We don't, but, and it's easier to like Monday morning quarterback than to go out there and do it yourself.
But at its core, it's all ego, right? Because it's like, I got here first. I'm special. You're late, you're not special. And that was the energy that I get. I get that from a lot of libertarians, and I agree with everything you said there. But also what I saw was a lot of Christians feel that way about Russell Brand. They're like, oh, I've been suffering in these trenches for decades, and here you come along, Sally come lately, Christian come lately. So I thought that was, I see the similarities and the overlap for sure. And I think that your question is a good one. Do we actually want to see our ideas implemented? Do we actually want to see our ideas spread? Or do we want to be little special boys by ourselves in our little club? And, my answer is I don't care about being a little special boy in my club. I really want to see these ideas implemented. And I don't think we have any time to wait. I mean, we're on the precipice of World War III, for God's sakes. Like, do you care the character and the heart and the deepest fabric of the advocate who's saying, hey, let's defund Israel. Hey, let's defund the war in Ukraine. Like, do you care? Are you going to purity test that person? Because I'm not going to purity test that person whatsoever. This is why I was such an outspoken advocate for RFK Jr., much to the disapproval of many and, my diehard longtime listeners that are libertarians. And this is why, I think RFK is terrible on so much, but there are it's triage. There are priorities. There are things that have to happen. We cannot fail in this regard. So that's why I think this kind of ties into your earlier question about coalition building. It's like, we have to. We just simply don't have a choice. So I like seeing it. I like seeing Russell Brand convert. I like seeing Jordan Peterson get down on a knee and pray in front of tens of thousands of people. I thought it was a really powerful moment. And, does it save the world? Probably not. But it's certainly not something I'm going to critique. So,
well, it's also, so what you just said there reminds me of another thing that now this is not new. Like, I say this too much. But it's the Nirvana fallacy, which is there's so many libertarians who, if like the thing you're doing can have even like one hole poked in it to go, well, but like that's not going, this could have this drawback, or it might not accomplish as much as you want to, and it doesn't get you where you want to go, then it's wrong, right? It's like, so like if we do a coalition with all these people and we come away and it's like, hey, here are all the positive takeaways, right? Like people talking about rejecting the state as being sovereign in our society, people wanting to abolish like the Department of Education, and people wanting to have more freedom and individual sovereignty in their medical choices and in their food choices, and all these different things. And they go, yeah, but you know what? They're still voting for Trump, and they're not like we said earlier, there's still too many of them are pro-Zionist, and they're not voting for Chase Oliver, so therefore it's a total failure and it's just a Trump rally. And I'm like, that's such for the party that brands itself, for the movement that brands itself as the third option, right? And as many times as you hear these people go, we got to end the duopoly, they have such binary thinking, right? Like it's this all or nothing, like either, and I think it's partly because a lot of libertarians of the sort of like old guard of the Libertarian Party before the Mises Caucus, to them it was all about votes. And so when it's all about votes, well, it's all about, okay, are they voting LP? Because if not, they're my enemy. And I'm like, well, no wonder you don't have any friends that aren't libertarians, because you think that every single person who doesn't vote libertarian is evil rather than just like misguided. I mean, and weren't we all there once? I mean, I wasn't a libertarian my whole life. I don't think you were either. It's like we all come from somewhere, and I thank God the people that got me to where I'm at today, didn't. I mean, I shouldn't say this, but the last duopoly candidate I voted for was Hillary Clinton. It doesn't get much worse than that.
Oof.
So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I am a second gen libertarian, so I have been a libertarian since I was a kid, but that doesn't matter, because the point is, like, I still have changed my opinion on certain topics. Like, we're not static beings. We're not static creatures from birth until adulthood. And you shouldn't be static even once you're an adult. You should still be evaluating and testing these ideals. So I agree with everything you said. I don't have much to add to it other than to say, I just think that like purity testing in this junction is crazy. It really is. I mean, 35 trillion debt, World War III, civil strife, multiple assassination attempts against the former and likely future president of the United States. Looks like it's happening from our own government. I can't prove that definitively. And then like there's all this negative. And like the one positive thing we're witnessing is that you have Brett and Eric Weinstein and RFK and Tulsi and Vivek and Donald Trump, all not libertarian, but all coming together in a direction that's far more libertarian than our current paradigm. And you can't spin that positively at all. Like zero, really? So that's my opinion of it. I think that it's a great thing. It's a tremendous opportunity for us. And that like, if we have an opportunity to influence that in a more libertarian direction to kind of shave down some of the issues that we really hate, that's part of that coalition, well, then we better be involved. Like this is our shot, because it will eventually form itself to be something that's more static than what it is right now. Like what it is right now is this kind of bizarre amalgamation of lots of different interests and ideas. But it will be narrowed down at some point, I would imagine, just by the nature of, party building.
I agree. And there's two directions I want to go with that. One, I'll do this first because there's a comment actually that lines up with it. Power Heals says, even if their faith is a grifter move, it's still a W that the popular thing is faith, and the same logic applies to lip service from politicians now. The Overton window has shifted. So that's a valid point that like, if you can make money by appealing to Christians and libertarians, well, that is evidence of a much shifted Overton window. But that would lead to and that's something that can be good, even if we can't know. We can't know if Russell Brand and Jordan Peterson are genuine. We can just like, all we can do is judge them by their fruit. And so far, I'd say it's a net positive on that end. But on the other end, then, if that's where we're at, well, then how do we leverage the position we're in to get the best outcome? And I think that people like Angela McArdle, who are getting a lot of heat for not just doing the easy thing and going out there and just like, well, here's our candidate, go vote for him, and doing the same, they're like, you know what, we're going to take a chance on this, weird thing with Trump right now after he came to our convention, and we're going to see what we can get out of it, and also kind of double down on these different coalitions that we're a part of. Because regardless of how this next election goes, like even if Trump wins, and let's say like, even, I don't know, let's kind of give like the best case scenario. Let's say that Trump wins. Let's say that Ross Ulbricht is freed. Let's say that he abolishes the Department of Education. Like, let's say like everything he promised to do, he comes through with. Okay, we're still going to have an uphill battle ahead of us if every single one of those things gets done, even though those would all be really good. And the odds of him getting even like 1% of those done are small. But we can either continue to put ourselves in positions where, as people continue to try to work within the Republican Party, continue to try the same tactics of the past and see them fail, we can put ourselves in the position where we've built relationships with these people and we can have an influence on what they do, and they view us as an ally to turn to and consider from rather than just an opposition. Or we can go back to the old status quo where we continue to get 2 to 3% of the vote every 4 years and nothing really changes.
Well, let's also be honest too. I mean, politics is very transactional. Like that's how you get things done in DC. You do something for me, I do something for you. So the offer that we have on the table is the libertarians have the ability to get me over the finish line. I'm speaking as if I'm Donald Trump. And if you do that, I will, at my end of the transaction, I will give you avoiding World War III, freeing Ross Ulbricht, and abolishing the Department of Education. That's the transaction that's being offered. Will he renege on it at the end of the day? Maybe. We don't know. But that's the nature of politics. We don't have the ability to win the presidency. We only have the ability to leverage our small influence to try and extract some concessions. These are the concessions. That's it. It's as simple as that. If that offends you, well, then you should just avoid and ignore politics entirely. Like, honestly, because that's how the Leviathan operates. That's how it moves. And that's actually the best aspects of how it moves, because the rest of the time it moves in just abject and overt violence. At least in this one, maybe we're deceived, but at least it's an offer of something. So I think that's the interesting opportunity that we have in front of us. I like anybody that's poo-pooing it. I totally respect that too, because it's like, oh, these people are going to screw you over, that they're never going to give you what they are promising. You might be right. How the F would I know? I mean, this is the first time that this has ever happened, though. So I think that it's kind of our duty to see what fruit it bears, because we're not going to win regardless. So, like, why not see what the fruit is here? As you were saying with Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, let's see what the fruit is. We don't know yet. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
Well, and Jordan Peterson's real interesting. There are so many people I know who actually kind of indirectly found their way to the libertarian movement because of Jordan Peterson. Because like when you read his books and we really listen to his biblical lectures and you hear like the underlying, repeated themes in his work, which is like compare human action from Mises and the talk about how the economy is the sum total of all the individual actions which are made based upon people making rational choices that they think are going to get them to a better place. So they have to kind of evaluate all their possible choices and make subjective value judgments. Okay, now compare that to Jordan Peterson talking about how in order to act in the world, there's always going to be hierarchies, and there's a hierarchy of values that you construct. And, and he obviously connects that both to psychology and economics and religion, but there's such it's such a rich philosophical crossover between what Jordan Peterson talks about and what libertarianism talks about and what Christianity talks about. And so, like, yeah, does it suck that he has Netanyahu on his show and tells them to give him hell on X? Like, yeah, that sucks. You know what also sucks? That like 90% of the population that's not either far left or libertarian also basically does that. Even though like the non-interventionism seems to be more present than it used to be, but what's motivating that is basically like American first and like we just don't want to be involved. But there's still a lot of people who are generally on Israel's side because like they haven't looked into this. But like, okay, if you like, we have two options: make Jordan Peterson our enemy, or if we stay in his orbit, maybe eventually you can have Jordan Peterson run into a Scott Horton or a Daryl Davis or Daryl Brooks, or Connor Freeman, someone from Libertarian Institute, and at least get him to platform someone like that and consider the perhaps that there's more. I know Jordan knows this, that there's always more than one side to history. He's actually, because he understands the complexity of political arrangements and propaganda, he's actually opposed to like the Russia-Ukraine war, and he was opposed to that before a lot of other conservatives were. So like the framework is there. He got one wrong. But like, why do we have to crucify people when they get just one thing wrong? All right, everyone. Well, that's all I have for you today. I hope that little snippet there was thought-provoking. And again, if you want to listen to the entire episode, the entire interview I did with Clint, I'll have a link for that in the description. And please, as always, make sure you're subscribed to this audio feed, to the LCI Green Room audio feed, and to my YouTube channel so that you can keep up to date with all of the content I have rolling out there. And that's all we have for you for this week. We'll be back next week with probably some more of our regularly scheduled programming, finishing up our time in eschatology in the New Testament. So until then, as I always conclude by saying, live at peace, live for Christ. Take care.
The Biblical Anarchy Podcast is a part of the Christians for Liberty Network, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute. If you love this podcast, it helps us reach more with a message of freedom when you rate and review us on your favorite podcast apps and share with others. If you want to support the production of the Biblical Anarchy Podcast, please consider donating to the Libertarian Christian Institute at biblicalanarchypodcast.com, where you can also sign up to receive special announcements and resources related to biblical anarchy. Thanks for tuning in.